Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to The Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Julia.
And I'm Stephany.
And we're a mother and daughter who love reading and talking about books. The ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, Mom.
How are you today?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
That's good. I'm fabulous too.
Good.
We can be fabulous together.
Yay.
What do you have in your mug today?
So I'm actually drinking tea for the first time in how many weeks?
Yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Yes. This is a raspberry tea. I didn't check if it was a white tea or not, but it's raspberry.
Is it one of my teas?
No.
Okay.
No. I was looking for something that was fruity flavored because this is the prime time for really good fruit.
Okay.
So, what are you drinking?
I think I'm drinking Stash citrus ginger tea.
Okay.
Has a little bit of an orange flavor.
Ooh.
Very gingery.
Ooh,
I'm enjoying it. It has no caffeine, which is what I'm leaning towards here lately.
Well, and I really like ginger tea.
I do too.
Yeah.
It's good for you too.
It is. I consume a lot of ginger because of those properties.
Hello, listeners.
Hi, friends.
Welcome to the Book Snug. Thank you for joining us today.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to be having a little discussion here because Julia has hit a speed bump in her reading life.
More like a speed ramp. It's ramped me into a couple months of just absolute nothingness.
Julia is not reading. So we thought we would talk about that today because reading slumps are a real thing. And I think we need to talk about how important it is to address a reading slump. And if we think it's important, what are some of the things we can do to kind of get ourselves back on track?
Yeah.
Away from the speed bump and back on the highway.
Yeah.
Or the backcountry road, whatever, wherever you want to drive.
Wherever we're meandering.
Let's finish this metaphor up here.
Well, and I think before we get too started into this, I think it's important to note that reading slumps and ruts and everything else, like that's normal. It's a normal part of reading. Like there's nothing wrong with my reading because I'm not reading as much right now. It's just, it's a reflection of the ebb and flow of life.
Life generally.
Yeah.
I can say for myself, I have had periods in my life where I have not read at all. Shocker of shockers, because I read a lot of books right now.
Yeah.
But I do know when I had young kids, when I was back in school, when I was working a very stressful job, there were periods of my life where I just didn't read because I didn't have the time or I didn't have the mental capacity or my attention was heading in other directions. I had other hobbies I wanted to pursue and reading just was not at the top of the list. So before we even dive into our topic today, I think it's just important to say that we want to start off this whole discussion saying that we understand that not reading is absolutely okay.
Yeah.
And even if you identify as a reader, that's part of your personality or how you see yourself. Not reading, you're not betraying yourself by not reading for periods of time.
No, and I still love reading just as much. I mean, Ben and I, we've just moved and we had literally had a conversation this afternoon about, he literally asked me, can you get rid of some of your books? And I was like, you're asking me to get rid of my children, so no. But just because I'm not reading doesn't mean that I still don't love reading just as much.
Right. Or you don't love your books.
Right.
Yeah. Or you don't want to engage in bookish discussions or participate in bookish activities. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's our baseline philosophical view on this, I think is the best way to say it.
Yes.
Okay.
We're going to be very insightful people today.
I think we'll start out just by getting everybody on the same page by discussing the definitions of the terms we're using. And there is nothing, like these aren't coming from a dictionary. No. These are just coming from our brains.
Yeah.
So however pea brain you think we are, this is where these definitions are originating from. The first term I used was a reading slump, and I think this is the term that most people are familiar with. A reading slump is just a significant decline in the amount of reading that you're doing in your life. You could still be reading, but you're reading much less, or maybe you're not picking up a book at all. That's a reading slump to me.
Right.
A reading rut is reading a particular type of book over and over and over again, or reading only the books you think you enjoy and not branching out at all. And you start to get a little bit bored.
Right. It's getting stuck in a pattern.
Right. And eventually it can lead to a slowdown in your reading because you're just not satisfied or you're not enjoying what you're reading. And then I also have the term a reading stall. And this is specific, I think, to getting stuck in a singular book. You pick up a book, you think you want to read it, you start reading it, and then you just kind of lose interest. If you're not I don't want to say a quitter. If you're not a DNFer, if you don't put books down that you're not enjoying, you can really get behind the book, and that can really slow your reading down, especially if you're a 1 book at a time person or a 2 book at a time person. It can really slow you down.
Yeah, and I have definitely fallen victim to that because up until maybe this year or last year, I didn't DNF.
Okay.
So I felt that I need to finish whatever I started.
Yeah.
And then I would get into a book and be really struggling with it. There's a book coming up for an upcoming guest interview that falls into this category.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is an example where I had started reading it and felt like I needed to see it through. And then I was in a significant stall afterwards because I probably should have just
stopped,
put it aside.
And it took you a lot longer to read it because you just weren't enjoying it.
Yeah.
Julia, you're in what I would call a reading slump. A reading slump where you're not reading, period, right now.
Right.
Do you want to tell us why? And maybe how it looks like in your life?
Yeah. So now, I guess in full transparency, this slump has been going on for a while. I began talking about this even before the beach at the end of May.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it in our second quarterly review.
Yeah.
No, our first. I can't remember.
One of them.
Yes.
And it is now currently going into the second week of August.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a big chunk of time. And within that, I did read 1 book. Well, I read a couple on vacation, but I've read 1 or 2 since I've been home.
Okay.
And I am in the middle of another one currently. So my reading speed has significantly slowed, but I have been reading just a lot less.
What do you think brought this reading slump on? Do you think it's a combination of symptoms or one major thing that started it?
I think it started as one thing and now it is a couple of different things.
Okay.
I think at the time it started maybe as just a general, I don't want to say lack of interest, but maybe exhaustion. I was really tired going into vacation because there were a lot of stressors at my job before going into vacation. And so I think that was the primary reason was I was just tired, which then led into this feeling of, because I don't have mental energy to give to anything, I'm not interested in any of my regular hobbies.
Okay.
I'm also not a fan of summer. If I haven't made that abundantly clear up until this point, I am not a fan of the summertime for the sole purpose of I don't like the heat.
Right.
And I have begun to really wonder if I experience a very mild form of seasonal affect in the summer.
But you have it in the summer instead of the winter time.
Yes, because it really affects my mental clarity. It affects my interest in lots of things. I don't have the darker side of seasonal affect, but it really affects my mood.
Right.
So then during the summer, I just kind of languish around all over the place, throwing myself from room to room, day to day.
That's pretty dramatic.
The summer, it is a mental exercise for me to get through.
Okay.
But yes, it sounds dramatic. But it does really impact my enjoyment of activities, my ability to do the things that make me really happy. So now that we're in August and the weather is still awful hot, I know that fall is coming.
Right.
And with that has brought a sudden bursting of creative energy. So now I have so much energy to give to all of my other creative endeavors that I'm still in my reading slump. But now when I do have free time, I want to work on this project. I want to do this thing. I want to do that thing. I want to do this thing on top of unpacking my new apartment.
Right. So now you're distracted with all of the other shiny things.
Yes.
And books are being put on the back burner.
Yes.
I thought you shared in one of our episodes too, and I don't remember which one, that you read a book. Oh, I guess it was our second quarterly review, because this was the book you shared that was a disappointment for you. It was about Lucrezia Borgia, and you said it
yes.
kind of put you in a slump afterward.
Yes, I think that amplified my feelings of stress from work, and because it took a much more negative turn in the story than I was anticipating, then it just made everything else feel like the exhaustion, the stress, the low patience. It just made all of that feel much worse.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're highlighting that book slumps can come from just about everywhere. I think you can get a book slump when you read a really bad book.
Oh, yeah.
You can get a book slump. You can get into a book slump when you read a really good book, because you have just had this wonderful high experience of this fabulous story, and you start to worry that you will never, ever experience that again, and nothing is really drawing you in.
Right. Although for me, a book slump from a good book is more like a dream haze. Like, I don't want to read another book or watch a movie because I don't want that dream haze of that good book to go away.
You just want to live in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's perfectly valid, but you're still in a book slump because you're not reading.
Right.
I think the first thing that we need to decide about all of these things, book slumps, reading ruts, a book stall, is how important is it really?
Right.
And I think this is an individual determination. And I also think that you need to evaluate where you are in your life and how much it matters to you. I personally feel like if you don't want to read, don't read. There's no crime in that.
No.
We are, Julia and I, when I say we are readers for escape and entertainment and enjoyment. So if it becomes something that's not enjoyable, then don't do it. There's no shame in that. So I want to stress that we're not doing this episode because we think that if you're not reading, you really need to get back on the wagon.
Right.
Yeah. That it's okay not to read. Like I said, I spent years of my life not really reading more than a couple books a year. So that's where we're coming from. I feel, because on this podcast, I have said numerous times, I read a lot. Last year, I read 100 books. That coming from me, somebody might interpret that as, I think a reading slump is horrible. Like, it's the worst thing that could happen to you. And I don't feel like that at all. My reading ebbs and flows, just like you said. And actually in August, I have not picked up a book for the last week and a half.
Oh, wow.
So,
well, and I think that that's another factor in this too, is context, right? Of like, yes, you were able to read so many books because of where you are in life right now. So it makes sense that you were able to read so many books versus somebody else
like
might
you.
not. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so even for me, who historically might have only read 32 books a year or whatever, a slump is still any time where your reading decreases.
And you're aware of it.
Right.
And I guess that's what this comes down to. If you're in a reading slump and you're aware of it and you're not happy about it, then we can help you a little bit with that.
Yeah.
I want to address one more thing as well. And this has more to do from a perspective of faith. As a Christian, you are always trying to balance your life. You want to be living a life in balance so that you're reflecting the life that God wants you to live. And that is about not allowing one part of your life to overtake everything else. I think when reading lives get unbalanced, we feel it as Christians because we recognize that there's something not right in our lives.
Right.
So, and I recognize this when I'm reading too much as well, where I feel like I'm putting too much focus on books where maybe I should be focusing on other things. So that's just another side note for people who care very much how they spend their time in relationship to their Christian life. Okay. Now we got all that out of the way.
We did say we were going to be philosophical. So I guess.
Yes. Yeah. And for me personally, I think about that a lot because I do spend a lot of time reading. So I'm constantly thinking, is this right now the best way to be spending the limited time I have here on this earth? Okay. So we've talked about all that. Let's say that you are in a reading slump, but you want to be reading again and you just don't know how to get yourself started. Let's talk about some things that we can do for ourselves that might jumpstart our reading or renew the passion that we feel for books and reading. The first thing I am going to say, though, is going to seem like it's counterintuitive, but I'm going to say don't do anything.
Yeah.
Just let it go.
Right.
Get on with your life. Do the things you need to do and the other things you want to do. And reading will probably come back around at some point.
I mean, when we think about that, I have been learning recently how cyclical human nature is. And much like any hobby or any season of life, I guess, just because there's limited interest in reading right now doesn't mean it's going to be that way for the rest of the year.
Right.
Or the rest of the week or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a cycle. It'll come back around. And so maybe waiting and letting everything else that's going on settle for that interest to come back.
The other thing to think about is sometimes when you really push something that's not working for you, all you're doing is making it worse. You're making yourself feel worse and you're just making the situation worse. So just don't read. I know that sounds like it's sacrilegious, but sometimes that is the best thing to do. It's just not to worry about it and just let it go.
I think that's a good point. And for me, it kind of goes back to you have to know yourself. So for my slump, in order for me to know how to move forward, I have to identify the root cause. I have to have an understanding why the slump happened. Now, I'm a naturally introspective, self-reflective, I spend a lot of time in my head type of person.
So do I.
Right. And so in my own understanding of my behavior, I have to know where it came from in order to know how to address it.
And it seems like you do because you were able to articulate where you think the problems are coming from.
So much like not doing anything, to a degree, for me, if I know what the root is, then I know that maybe not doing anything is the right course of action.
Right.
Or if it is, like right now where I was talking about the sudden influx of creativity, maybe it's finding the book that matches whatever energy field I'm on for creativity.
Right.
And going from there. So I want to underscore that it's also, within this, it's understanding your own self and how you pull yourself out of something like this too.
Reader, know thyself,
Yes.
I think is the best way to say that.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say you are in a reading slump or a reading rut and you're not happy with where you are. You're not satisfied to do nothing because you feel like you want to be reading. So now we have some suggestions. All of the suggestions here are things that I have used in the past, even recently, to help myself keep the reading groove going without maybe reading full-length novels or heavy-duty nonfiction that is not helping me in my situation.
Right.
So the first thing that I would recommend, and I think, Julia, you agree with me on this one, is to maybe revisit favorite books or favorite authors. So if you have an author that you really love, maybe go back and read your favorite book of theirs. So the person who comes to mind for me is Jane Austen, and I will often go back and read Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion. Those are my two favorite books of hers. I also reread The Hobbit regularly because not only do I love Tolkien's writing, but The Hobbit in particular is lighter and funnier and a little snarkier than a lot of his other books. And it just is a delight to read. And so I revisit that a lot. Do you have any books, Julia, that you like to go back to if you're just unsure what you want to read or if you're feeling a little slumpy?
Yeah. I mean, before I answer that, though, I saw a video the other day of somebody who celebrated their 33rd birthday and had it Hobbit themed because in the Hobbit world, you come of age at 33.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's so fun. But yes, revisiting favorite books. authors I can think of right off the top of my head. And one of those that I'll tend to go back to is Dan Brown. And I have this as another point on here, but because I know the structure of his books, they are to a degree incredibly predictable and they're fast paced. I know that if I need something quick, that's a really good place to start. I will also say this summer for me, I do seasonal bucket lists, and this summer I structured as quote unquote childhood nostalgia.
Okay.
But it's kind of taken on the look of healing my inner child. So for me, a lot of the books that I would go back to include Because of Winn-Dixie or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Holes or some of these books that have good, solid childhood memories to them.
Right.
Ella Enchanted.
Make you feel good.
Yes. And then from there, that would be a starting point into some of the other reading material. Like I'm not looking for anything serious, so I'll go back to something that I know is more lighthearted.
Yeah. I think too, when you revisit old favorites, you know what you're getting. And sometimes a reading slump happens because you're not trusting yourself to pick books up because you've had several bad books in a row and you can just feel yourself not wanting to pick up books. So if you go back to a novel you already know the outcome for, that can be reassuring and you already know you like it. So there won't be any disappointment at the end.
Right. And there's something to be said about spending time with your comfort characters that are comforting to you in some way. Maybe it's the Harry Potter series or The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Characters that are, it sounds
friends.
so, yeah.
They're friends.
Yeah. People that you enjoy spending time with and that they make the story enjoyable.
Yeah. That can also be really good if your reading slump is because of stress.
Yes.
Outside of your reading life, whether it's work or family or whatever. Spending time with beloved characters, especially, I don't know what it is about middle grade and children's books, but I think you're right. It's just that homey nostalgia that gives you the warm fuzzies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there has to be studies that have been done, research that's been done to identify why that feeling is so rejuvenating.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be very interested to find that information.
Something else that you can do if you would like to get out of a reading slump is to consider picking up fast-paced, very plotty books that move along really quickly, because maybe what you need is a good experience that's successful.
Right.
So, Julia, do you want to share what you're doing right now? Because you are actually engaging in this. And I think you have the perfect book to illustrate this point.
Yes. So I am currently reading Ready Player One by Ernest Kline.
Yes.
And this is generally a book that is outside of my normal, to a degree, a step outside of my normal books on my bookshelf.
It's speculative science fiction-y reading.
It's a lot heavier on video game stuff that I don't know a ton about.
Right. And 1980s culture.
Yeah. Yes. But this book, the writing is really fun and it is very fast paced. And so it's created a world that when I sit in to read it, I'm reading a lot at a time and it's making the story go by really fast. And so this might not be fast paced like the Dan Brown books that I was talking about. It's fast paced and keeping my attention even through the slower sections of the story as well. And I've been really enjoying it.
Some other fast-paced books would be the Murderbot Diaries. They are also short. So you get a short book that moves very quickly and you have a very interesting character to follow. So that would be another recommendation, I would say, for a fast-paced book.
Yeah, I haven't read that one.
There's a book out right now that I've heard is very, very fast-paced. And it's Drowning, but now I can't recall the author, so I'll put it in the show notes. But that is, you would not want this. Because it's about a plane that crashes into the ocean, and there are people who are alive at the bottom of the ocean. So it's the story of rescuing them. But I think from the first page, it is just nonstop action.
Yep. No, my knees are weak.
But it's a book that I have thought about numerous times picking up just to kind of light a fire under my reading, because like I said, I am a little slumpy right now too. Not bad, but
sure. Well, and I think you said that's fast paced and also short. Did you say that?
Yeah.
And I think short books are another good way of kind of navigating slumps. Tuck Everlasting is another really great one that I have in my inner child reading for the summer. And it is super short.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, I don't know, funny example, but like taking one of those 5-hour energy shots. You just need something to get you back into it. And short books, whether they are designed to be novellas or to be
short novels, like 100 to 200 pages.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or if they are middle grade, they can be just enough to kind of wet your whistle again.
Yeah.
To get
Just
you
give
moving.
you a shot of reading adrenaline.
Yeah.
Then you're on your way. Short books are really having a moment right now,
Yeah.
too. I was in Barnes and Noble and I saw several short books. I've read several short books recently that have been excellent. But they were all literary fiction. I'm pretty sure you can find a short book in any genre that you want, that you desire.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so short books is another option. You're not investing a lot of time. You will feel like you accomplished something more quickly. Yeah, it's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
I'd also like to recommend picking up a graphic novel, or if you've are feeling adventurous, maybe manga. Especially middle grade graphic novels. They tend to be delightful stories. The artwork tends to be generally very colorful. The color palettes are always really nice. The artwork is more simplistic and you can get through them very quickly. I have Anne of Green Gables upstairs as a graphic novel, and the graphic novel itself is very true to the story. I enjoyed it, but this is a problem for me with graphic novels. If I don't like the artwork, it detracts from my reading experience. Sure. And in the Anne of Green Gables graphic novel, Anne's nose is a triangle, and it just drives me crazy. Everybody else has normal noses, but hers is not normal, and I don't understand why. But if you can get past that, the Anne of Green Gables graphic novel is a wonderful reading experience. If you've read Anne of Green Gables before or not, it's good.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of classics that are done in graphic novel form. I don't recommend Neil Gaiman overall for graphic novels because his adult graphic novels are extremely adult.
Yes.
Some of them are scary too. But he has a book called The Graveyard Book, which is middle grade, and that is a graphic novel, and that's good.
Yes.
That's delightful.
Well, and with that too, I would say maybe looking at graphic novels or illustrated versions of favorite books as kind of another way to pull yourself back in. For whatever reason, I think an Alice in Wonderland illustrated copy or as a graphic novel because of the bright images and whatever, and the silliness of the story, or even Wizard of Oz would be a really great pull you back in. And those are both stories that are very well known regardless.
Yes.
So,
Garlic and the Vampire we've mentioned on here many times before.
Yeah.
El Defo is also a really excellent middle grade graphic novel, which is not fantasy. It is serious. It's actually the autobiography of the author as a child.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it deals with deafness and how it makes you other from people, and then how she incorporated into her school and her friend group. And it's very good. I think it's an award winner. I'm trying to think of any other middle grade. Lightfall is beautifully illustrated. That is a fantasy.
Okay.
So just peruse the kids section of the graphic novels and see what's there.
Yes.
You might find something that really, really pleases and gets you excited about reading.
And really, does there really need to be a separation between what we read as adults and what we read as children? Like, to a degree of, like, as adults, if I want to read a Cam Jansen, I'm going to read a Cam Jansen.
Right. There's
like,
no shame.
No.
Yeah.
No. It doesn't go the reverse. However, like, kids should.
No,
it doesn't go that way. But
thank goodness.
but like, if I wanted to read a Magic Treehouse to restart, like, as a trigger of childhood memories as to why I liked reading, like, there's absolutely no shame in that.
No. I only have one experience with manga, and that is the Spy Family series, which I really, really enjoy. There are so many fun pieces to this story. I don't really want to give anything away. If this interests you at all, just go check it out. It is about a spy and his one assignment is he has to have a family to infiltrate a private school and get close to this very famous government. I think he's a government official or he's a big businessman.
Sure.
But he just like piecemeals a family together, and everybody has secrets. Everybody has special powers, even the dog. And you just follow them along on these adventures with this overarching theme of this mission.
Sure.
It's delightful, but even in this story, there is violence.
Sure.
So you really have to know yourself. Is that something that you even want to be putting in your eyeballs?
Yeah.
So, but it's a recommendation I would give. And it's a very popular manga.
Sure. Well, and I think I have never read any manga before. And I think that's just for me because reading the book backwards to forwards is a weird, my brain doesn't like to work with that.
I will say it took me a little while to get the hang of that. I actually didn't understand it. And thank goodness the Spy Family books have directions. Because not only do you read it backwards, you read it backwards on the page. So you're not
right to left.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So that is like a totally different reading experience than anything that we're normally used to in America.
Right. Right. I think, if I was not actively reading or if I was in the slump that I was at the beginning of the summer, I definitely think, changing it up and maybe reading a manga because it is so outside of my comfort zone might have pushed me, one, to finding out that maybe I really do like it, but then also, hey, this is fun. I'm going to keep reading more. And then it would kind of push me forward in that a little bit.
Yeah. Spy Family, it's not a cozy manga, but it's definitely a more gentle manga, I think, with good themes of friendship and family and just good. There are other manga series like that. You just have to dig around and look. And I would recommend that you just Google lists of like family friendly manga or cozy manga. That's another term you can use.
Sure.
Because you have to be careful with manga. You can wade into some very
odd things.
Yeah. Dark.
Yeah.
Which we're not going there.
Nope.
Not with this podcast.
Nope. Not today.
Not with my reading.
Nope.
Okay. I think that's enough about graphic novels and manga.
Sure.
So I have another suggestion.
Okay.
If you are a fiction reader that you generally pick up fiction books, mix it up and look for some nonfiction that really excites you. If you are a mystery reader, try some true crime. If you are a general fiction reader, you might want to consider reading some narrative nonfiction. Maybe you are more interested in, popular science. So books about how your body works, or books about animals, or books about space, things like that might be something that interests you. There are a lot of nonfiction authors who write about those topics in a very engaging way, not dry. I'm thinking Mary Roach, Bill Bryson, Eric Larson. So there are a lot of nonfiction books for beginner nonfiction readers that are very good, very engaging, and could really jumpstart your reading. Yeah. If that is something that interests you.
Right. And I read Eric Larson earlier this year. And again, that was another one that was so far outside of my normal reading, and I enjoyed it so much. And so now I am interested, to look at other literary nonfiction and read more stories that way. No, I think I'm still going to be pretty particular because I'm not a nonfiction person at all. But having read In Cold Blood, Devil in the White City, I do that all of the time. All of the time. Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, having read that, opened up a really interesting door for me to continue to expand what I like to read.
And there are a lot of authors like him.
Yes.
That I think would fill that same or scratch that same itch.
Absolutely.
I'm going to talk about a few things now that you can do that don't really involve reading that might get you interested in picking a book back up. The first thing I would recommend is maybe engage in some book adjacent activities. So the first thing that came to my mind is watching BookTube. Find a couple booktubers that read a lot like you, or read books that interest you that you don't normally read.
Sure.
And watch a couple of their videos. On Goodreads, you could read reviews. Goodreads has a blog style newspaper where they talk about new books coming out, where they do lists of books in a certain topic or theme or genre. BookBub, which is a book discount website, also has a blog, and they do the same type of thing. They do all kinds of articles about certain types of books. They interview authors. School is coming up, so they'll probably do a school themed blog about new books that are related to school. So things like that I would recommend just to get yourself maybe interested in books again. Sure. Even if you're not picking them up, you're starting to whet your appetite.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, you know, maybe you don't watch BookTube, but if you have other social media, so Book Instagram, following people on Instagram, or if you have TikTok, get involved in Book Talk, wherever your social media is.
Yes.
Finding the book community there.
Yeah.
I would also say here, romanticize your reading time. And that sounds so silly, but if you're slowly working through a book that you're struggling with, and maybe it's putting you towards a rut or a stall, romanticize that. So maybe that means take yourself on a picnic with that book, or maybe light some candles with a pretty cup of tea. Like, put effort into creating a really cozy or really pretty or lovely Instagram-worthy reading spot as well.
I know a lot of people will go to YouTube and they will pull up, help me out, Julia, ASMR room.
Or ambient noise is the other one.
Yeah. With fireplace and snow is blowing and you can hear the wind. And it's that whole sensory experience.
And there are some really fun ones where you can get Hogsmeade, the sounds of Hogsmeade. Yes. Or of the Hogwarts Library.
Oh, yeah.
Or if you're reading... I know that there's Game of Thrones ones. Yeah. There's pretty much any theme you're looking for, you can find with ambient noise, which really does add to the reading experience as well.
Right. So that might get you in the mood to pick up a book.
Yeah.
I just thought about something else in engaging with social media, listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are.
Hi.
But there are some great book podcasts out there. Some of the ones I listen to are Currently Reading with Meredith and Katie. I listen to From the Front Porch with Annie Jones. She's a bookstore owner in Thomasville, Georgia. I listen to Diving In, and I can't remember the names of the ladies that do. That's an Australian
fun
book podcast. And of course, Anne Bogle's Modern Mrs. Darcy, What Should I Read Next? Those are just a couple that just come off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But honestly, there are so many book podcasts out there doing all kinds of different things. Yeah. So you could investigate that, and that might gin up your interest in picking up a new book.
Yeah. Really, and I think this whole tip maybe that we're talking about is more about doing things that remind you of why you love to read.
Exactly, Julia. You said it. You said it right.
So whether it is wandering bookstores or reading blogs or watching whatever it is, reminding yourself of, oh, hey, reading is still fun. Right. It's still cool.
I do love this.
Yes. Yes.
Along with that, you said wandering a bookstore. With that, there's the temptation of buying things. And maybe you don't want to do that.
Depending on how strict you are with yourself.
Well, I'm not like zero strict. So maybe you don't want that temptation, then wander your library because there is zero risk and you can just wander every aisle, see what the library has, and you might find something that you didn't know about that you really want to pick up.
Yeah. I mean, now I am pretty strict with myself when I go to bookstores. I've gotten in the really good habit of taking pictures of books that I want. So a couple weeks ago, took myself on a self-care date. I had errands to run anyway, so I did just a couple of things while I was out. And I walked around Target and looked at the books that were there, and then walked around Barnes & Noble and looked at the books that were there. I did buy a cookbook, though, because new apartment, why not? There's something
you
fun.
Need a new cookbook.
Right, there was something fun about buying a new cookbook. And then when I was at the mall to get my wedding rings inspected. I then walked around Books A Million. So even though I wasn't buying anything, the act of walking around, touching the books, looking at the books, looking at the book covers, looking at different sections that I would never have looked at before. I spent a whole bunch of time in a Harry Potter section, which I tend not to do as much anymore. But allowing myself the freedom to wander where I wanted was so cliche, really healing.
Do you know what though? Being around books makes me happy.
Yes.
I'm sure that's why I stop in at Barnes and Noble when whenever I'm nearby, even though I have no plans to purchase anything. It's just, I just like being near books.
Yeah.
Happy memories for me. It's just a happy experience overall.
Right.
Okay. So what cookbook did you get? Do you remember?
I can tell you. So I don't know if I said it on the podcast here, but I'm on a building sustainable habits in my life. And I bought a cookbook about food waste, how to use all kinds of different food and all kinds of different recipes to limit food waste. Okay. So some of the recipes in this book include making slaw out of broccoli stems. So this cookbook is called Perfectly Good Food, a totally achievable zero waste approach to home cooking by Margaret Lee and Irene Lee. And this was the first cookbook that I read the entire introduction to, this book is incredibly colorful and there's so many graphics to it. But this is an actual thing that I'm enjoying a lot, of learning how to limit and being creative with the leftovers that I have, the food scraps. So this was just a really fun cookbook to pick up.
Did you say you got that at Target?
I bought it at Barnes & Noble.
Okay. Because what is it about the Target book section? I feel like I have to walk through it every time I'm there, and it doesn't really ever change. No. But I still have to walk through and look at all the books.
Yeah, Target right now seems to be carrying a lot of the Rupi Kapoor, the poetry.
On the one side, yeah.
A lot of the YA vampire fantasy stuff.
On the
There's
one side.
Very limited.
On the other side, they have Colleen Hoover, Sherry Lapina, those types of books, yeah. Well, I think reading a cookbook counts as reading.
Sure.
Right?
I have looked at it front cover to back cover.
Yeah.
I looked at all of the recipes.
Yes.
Ben made fun of me for it, but I did it.
Not that we're counting our books,
No.
but I just think that reading a cookbook is reading.
Yes. And now that I have a nice, big, beautiful, big kitchen, I'm excited to try all of the recipes.
Yeah. For my next two suggestions, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb. My first suggestion is try reading some poetry, because generally when you're reading poetry, you're not reading pages and pages. You're just reading a couple pages. And I would also recommend that you get an anthology, especially if you don't read poetry and you're not familiar with the poets that you like. If you get an anthology, you're exposed to many different kinds of poets, and then you can find poets that you might want to look at more closely. So I like nature poetry. The natural world is a requirement. Spending time in the natural world is a requirement for my mental health and my soul. It's one of the places that I feel God's presence the most easily in my life. And so nature poetry just seemed like a natural type of poetry to pick up. I picked up an anthology. I found several poets that I like to read. Christina Rossetti, Ted Hughes. I really like his nature poetry. So I actually bought a collection of his poetry then. Discovered that I like some of his and some I don't, but it doesn't matter because it's the act of discovery and then the pleasure of reading the actual poetry. Now, I am a person who loves words, and I love when words are put together beautifully or creatively. I love when you can tell that someone has taken care with every single word in a piece of writing. So poetry works for me. It might not work for you, but it is a suggestion to just keep your reading moving if you feel like you're not doing that and you want to. My second suggestion is maybe come up with a little mini project that really interests you. I have a little mini project going on this summer. I'm reading 4 classic summer books that I already owned. It was just my way to kind of get myself to read them. I'm not in a reading slump, But I'm definitely in a reading, I don't even know what to call it. I just feel like I'm struggling to pick up books. I am picking them up. I'm reading them. And I'm doing better about enjoying them. But I was just having a hard time even focusing on what should I read.
Well, and that for you started around the same time it did for me.
It did, yeah. So I made this little mini reading project, picking classics, figuring that most likely they were going to be good experiences. And that has been a tremendous experience. And it actually really sparked my interest in reading again. So if you are a person like me who can be very motivated by external factors like a project, maybe making your own little project would work to help you get your reading life back on track. I've enjoyed it so much that I'm going to do one for the fall too.
Oh, fun.
With vampires.
Ooh. Well, a lot of my autumn fall books are going to be vampire based, which I'm excited for. Kind of in that vein of a project. This is not something that I have the capacity to do right now, but somebody who keeps popping up on the podcast Instagram is somebody who has wrapped all of her TBR books in paper, brown paper, and has labeled them different numbers. And so when she wants to read a book, she pulls the number out of a jar, and that's the book that she reads. Yeah. And so that could be a really fun way to get yourself back reading again. Is it's like
make it a game.
Or what is it called? A blind date with a book.
Oh, yes.
You're dating your books blind by wrapping them up in paper and pulling the number. Yeah. Fun little things like that. Maybe have somebody create an advent calendar for you with books that every week you pick a different one, right? So making reading fun again.
Yes. But you have to know yourself.
Yes.
That won't work for me.
Right.
It absolutely would not work for me because in a way it's somebody telling me what I have to read. And that just that would never fly. As soon as I opened the book, even if it was a book I really want to read, if I had to open it and read it right then, I'd be like, nope, that's my rebellious.
So then it would make
rebellious
it worse.
Streak. Yeah. Yeah. That would not help a reading slump for me, but it really could help somebody who loves that kind of stuff.
Yes. Well, and it wouldn't work for me. One, I just got done talking about zero waste and sustainability. All that paper is not a good idea as I throw my pen across the room. But also, I would get bored with the idea halfway through it. Yeah. So I'd read so many books and be like, well, I'm over this. And then I would just start pulling them off the shelf and go from there.
But it's a suggestion. We're all different.
Absolutely.
We're all different people and we're all different readers. So there you go. Those are basically the suggestions we have for a reading slump or a reading rut, or even if you're stalled in your reading, you're in the middle of a book and you just can't seem to get yourself going. I mean, personally, I would recommend if you are in the middle of a book and you're having trouble getting yourself to pick the book up, if it's not something you have to read for whatever reason, a class or work, don't read it because I believe 100% in not finishing books that aren't working for you. Doesn't mean they're a bad book. It doesn't mean the author wrote something bad. It just means that book at this place in your life is not working. So put it aside.
Well, and maybe this is just because of where I am at life. For me, there is something really important about recognizing the things that work for you right now and the things that don't. And maybe it's nonchalant, but respect that. I don't know. Like, don't force something that's not going to fit.
Right. And that brings us really to our last points. To really know yourself. Spend some time in self-reflection. Yeah. Why do you read? What are the reasons that you read? And then are those reasons, are they helping your reading life or are they making it worse? So I'm thinking of things like fear of missing out or FOMO, which social media has really ramped up.
Which also, can I just be a little maybe petty for a second? If you're reading a book because of FOMO, I think you need to find another motivator.
Well, but many people read books because they want to know what everybody's talking about.
And I know Nana talked about that in her episode too, of why she reads.
Yeah, she does. That is part of the reason why she reads. Nana. Is she wants to be in on the know. Yes. She wants to know what's going on.
Yes.
Maybe your reading tastes are changing and that's why you're feeling slumpy or you feel like you're in a reading rut because what was working for you before isn't working for you anymore. Yeah. And maybe you need to start taking steps outside of those normal genres to find out what is working for you now. Or maybe you've just completely burnt yourself out on a certain topic or type of book, and you need to step away from that and, again, start looking elsewhere for enjoyment and entertainment and escape.
Well, and another side of that too is maybe the books that you're reading are having a negative impact on you. Yeah. So there have been times I love fantasy and I love magical fantasy stories, but I also know because of the things that I'm interested in my own life that magic can be not a good thing for me to read after a while.
Right.
So an example, I'm interested in natural medicines or things like that. And that can very quickly turn into things that I don't want it to. And so I know that I have to be careful with how many books I read about magic. And so maybe I'm in a reading slump because I've read too much and I can feel my thoughts turning to things that shouldn't. Or maybe it's too many horror books or too many thrillers or just... There's scripture that says to guard your heart. And if you're not guarding your heart, that can have a very massive impact, much like you were talking about balance before at the beginning of all things in moderation. And not to get on soapbox here, but maybe that's having a play in it too, of you're consuming material of one thing or another that's setting things a little off kilter.
Yeah. And I'm going to move from that right into take the pressure off yourself. Reading, like I said at the beginning, this is for us a fun activity. I mean, we read for all kinds of different reasons, but for the most part, I read to relax, escape, and for entertainment. So there shouldn't be any pressure. It should just be what it is. Yeah. I started documenting what I'm reading so I could remember, because I have an old brain and it's getting worse and worse with memory. So I wanted to be able to write down the books I've read so I can go back and look through them and then remember my thoughts on the books. Ratings for me, I rate books more for myself to be able to remember, did I really think it was good? Was it okay? Was it not so good? But even though we share ratings on this podcast, because my ratings are so personal and so completely dependent on my completely subjective experience of them, I don't think they're legitimate. They're not legitimate for anybody else. They're just only legitimate for me. But taking the pressure off, let's get back to the point, Stephany. Taking the pressure off having to read a certain number of books, having to post a certain number of things on Instagram about different books. Right. Keeping extremely complicated book journals. I mean, if those things, if they give your life value and they don't weigh you down, then keep doing those. But I think for a lot of people, they get caught up in that, and then it starts to really degrade their experience, their positive experience with reading. Yeah. So just do what works best for you and let the rest go. And don't make it be about numbers or numbers of books, numbers of viewers, numbers of listeners. Just let it be a good thing in your life and be done. Yeah. No, I agree completely. I think I keep saying I think, but we're being reflective and philosophical. So hopefully you're thinking. Hopefully. I think with those numbers and everything, especially when we look at Book Talk or BookTube or Bookstagram, this pressure to have things be aesthetically pleasing or in a certain design, or the brand has to be homogenous across everywhere. I mean, sure, here as a podcast, that's something that we're concerned. Toward. But if it is, again, going back to balance and moderation, if it is taking away from the reading or if it's taking away from the enjoyment, reevaluate, put a pause. Yeah. Or change things up. There's nothing wrong with quote unquote rebranding, right? And trying something new. And, or even rebranding how you see yourself. Yeah, absolutely. Really. Yeah. Yeah. Allow yourself to be the reader that only reads half the books that you say you read every year. That just made me a little anxious. Well, it does for me because I'm thinking about all the wonderful stories I'd be missing out on. But again, I am in a different reading space in my life than I was when I was your age, Julia, or when I had teenagers, or when I was in school. Yeah, it's just everybody's at a different stage, experiencing life differently, and you just need to have grace.
Yes.
Extend grace to yourself and space to figure out what works best for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. Well, I think this was a really fun conversation.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I hope our listeners enjoyed it and maybe got some good information from it. If not, we just had the opportunity to rant.
Yeah. You know what? Sometimes we just need that. But listeners, we would love to know, how do you get yourself out of reading slumps or stalls or ruts? How do you see your reading life?
Yeah.
And what are some of the things that you do to keep your reading life interesting?
Right. And do you even care if you get into a reading slump? Do you even notice that you're not picking up books?
Do you take it personally if you get into a reading slump?
Right.
So we'd love to hear about your thoughts on this one.
Up next.
Yeah, I was just looking at this to make sure, but we already talked about that. So up next, we're going to continue with our school theme. We did that before this episode. We're going to get back into it. And we are talking about the required reading, the good, the bad, and the ugly from high school.
Oh, my.
So buckle in for that one.
I'm going to say most of it was ugly.
Hey, me too. I do have one good one.
I have a couple good ones, but I have some pretty bad memories too.
So that'll be a really fun episode then. After that, our third 3 Peas in a Pod episode will be coming the beginning of September, middle of September.
September 20th.
Yes. And our special guest has chosen The Secret History by Donna Tartt for us to read.
This will be very interesting because we've all read it before.
Yes.
And we have very differing opinions on the book.
So yes, this will be a very interesting episode. If you want to do the rating system with us or to have a conversation with us, go ahead and read the book if you so desire.
Yep.
Well, then, friends, thank you for spending some of your time with us today. And we hope that you join us in the next episode.
Bye, friends. We'd love for you to continue today's conversation with us at the BookSnug_podcast on Instagram and at the BookSnug Podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.budsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, so famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me," and we wholeheartedly agree.